afternoon and welcome to Intangify. I'm your host, Matthew Asbell. The Intangify podcast is where we talk about the intangible assets of business, things that you don't think about that are the reasons why entrepreneurs and small businesses are successful and move forward. My guest today is Laurence Shanet, and Laurence is a creative director, and writer. He has many hats, and I half jokingly posted on LinkedIn today that we would be red shirting him. You may know that concept of red shirt. That's when you have a child that you hold back in school. And there's something about Laurence and his creative spirit that makes me want to sort of go back to my inner child. So I end up entertaining myself. The question is whether I'm entertaining anybody else will be a totally different issue. But Laurence, welcome. Glad to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Make sure you take yourself off mute.
Yeah. I think I'm off mute now. Thanks. It's great to be here. And I think you actually covered a lot of it. I'm a creative director and director. I came through the advertising world. So I worked at ad agencies for many years. And then I discovered directing. I had been on the sets of a lot of commercials through my advertising work. And of all the people on the set, it looked like the directors were the people having the most fun. So I thought, that's what I want to do. And at each stage of my advertising career, I think that was my process, was just see who I'm interacting with that's having the best time and try and have that job. So directing was it, and did that for many years in commercials, but also started doing some TV shows, pilots, network shows even, and discovered that variety is really the thing that turned me on creatively. Being able to do something different every day. And so now I still do almost all those things. I still creative direct. I do some writing and thought leadership and ghost writing for people who don't feel comfortable with their own voices as a way of expressing what they want to say. And I direct commercials, I direct TV shows, and anything creative that's thrown at me, I enjoy, as long as it has to do with communicating in messages.
It's very similar, and you and I have had a few conversations where our lives sort of parallel each other in different universes. But it's very similar for me in the sense that I entered into intellectual property law as someone who wanted to be creative in many different ways. I wanted to be creative in science and technology, and I wanted to be creative in the arts and entertainment and in branding and marketing, and kind of all of those things were IP. So I had to do this. And it was the variety, right, across the way that for me also makes it really, really fun, and every day is different, right?
I think when you and I have talked, it's been interesting because people think of someone who does creative for a living and an attorney probably not being that similar. And we discovered so many things that, and I guess we're excluding the audience here because they weren't privy to those conversations, but we were surprised at how similar we were in many ways. And I think that's pretty common. And I think when you're in the creative world, one of the things you think about is which of the messages you want to put out there has something that everyone will have in common. And really, that's what's amazing about a great movie. It doesn't matter if it's happening at an Antarctic research station and you've never been to one. It's the themes are something that people can see themselves in. And the bigger picture is the things that you have in common. And that's what makes one good and another one not good.
I love how you just demonstrated your skills as being the master of the segue. You did such a smooth transition from, yes, we're both creative and we like variety, into messaging. Let's talk about messaging now.
Okay.
So let's do that. A lot of what you do, whether you do it in a number of different media, but a lot of what you do is about messaging. And and I really wonder what goes into the message that you want to give.
Absolutely. I think that people generally think that if they have something they want to tell people, that everyone else will be as interested in it as they are. And that just isn't, unfortunately, the reality. We're all interested in what we're interested in. There'll be overlaps, as you and I discovered, but in general, especially in business, when you're trying to communicate something, you have to really mind the gap between what you want people to know and what they might want to know about. And it's always a good idea to talk to them in terms of things that they know about, want to know about, or care about, rather than what you want them to know. And I think that's a
So how
huge
do you
one.
know that? I mean, how do you know what they care about so that you can deliver a message to them, that appeals to their interests?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes some people good at it and some people not. But it's not just a natural talent item. It's really the process of thinking about what they might want to know as opposed to what you want them to know, and thinking about what might be useful to them. So if you're speaking to an audience that includes a lot of attorneys, they'll have different interests than an audience that has a lot of sports fans. And there will be overlap because a lot of those attorneys might be sports fans, but you have to think of them in terms of that group that they are part of. And that may be very narrow or very broad, depending on what the message is. But you want to think in terms of what that audience cares about. And so when you have a product, you want to tell them all about it. But imagine you sell a little widget that makes someone's life better. You care about how it's built. You care about the supply chain. You care about all that stuff. They probably don't. They probably care about how it's going to affect their lives. What's the benefit for them? So you really want to speak in those terms, I think. And that's abstract as well as something as specific as a product. It applies to thought leadership and speech writing. It applies to any kind of creative communication.
So I was planning to hold this towards the latter portion of our talk, and I want to drill down more into the messaging component. But it just occurs to me that we wanted to talk about AI in this context, and it occurs to me that AI sort of feigns that idea of knowing what you're interested in, and I think is bad at that, or to some degree bad at that, maybe getting better. But just to highlight what's to come in our conversation, maybe you could comment on AI as a tool to recognize what the reader or viewer wants.
Yeah, I think AI is interesting because it appears to be doing one thing, and I think people often are sold AI on the basis of it doing something which is emulating a human that it isn't really doing. And that's not necessarily because it's bad at it. It's because that's not what it's doing. It's averaging out inputs. It's not really, no matter how consciously it seems to be replying to your prompts, it's not really responding to your prompts, and it's not thinking about what the question is you've asked it. It's taking all of the massive things in its data set and it's averaging them out to giving you what it thinks you want based on the most likely thing in the world. And that means that in a sense, everything you get will be really, really, really average. And in many cases, having the average of a zillion things out there that relate to that is exactly what you want and is amazing, but it's never going to be interesting or unique in that sense. So it's doing that on the level of every word, not every thought or every sentence. And it sequentially is figuring out what is the next word most likely to be and giving you that. So it's not really conversing with you. And as long as you realize that, then I think its responses make more sense in that context.
That does make sense to me. And sort of shifting gears back to the messaging topic, we'll come back to AI later when we have time towards the end. But one of the things that we talked about is with messaging, it's not just what the message is, but how you convey it, your tone, and I think we know from what is it, 20 years of email communications, that tone is not conveyed clearly in the written word always. And so I think, going back to AI very briefly, right, it can't necessarily interpret the intended tone behind the written word that somebody scrawled out when it prompted it, right? So it has a formula to do that. but it doesn't necessarily capture the tone. And I think probably you as a writer and as a director are very focused on that aspect of the tone that you want to convey.
Absolutely. I think that people don't realize how much that plays into it. But as soon as you watch a movie or a TV show, you really learn that lesson quickly if you look at it. So when you look at a page, most people, when they try screenwriting for the first time and they have zero experience, their goal, they think, is to say exactly what that person wants someone to know. But that's not how characters communicate in real life. When I say characters, I really mean humans. When someone has a thought that they want to communicate to their partner or their parent or something like that, often they don't say what they're feeling. They say something maybe adjacent to it. Sometimes they'll even say the opposite. So if you write in the way that all people are saying what they want people to know, it'll feel very artificial. And tone matters. So say you asked me, do you like pistachios? And I hated them. Like, I might say, no, I don't like pistachios. But that's probably not how I'd say it in a casual real world conversation. And if you said, oh, you love pistachios, right? I might say, yeah, right. Tone makes a huge thing in that, because on the page, that's just, yeah, you've got it correct. I love them. But obviously, when I say it that way, it means exactly the opposite. And so really clever writers will often write thinking about those things, whereas the average layperson wouldn't. Would it be more interesting if they used the opposite idea, but expressed it with sarcasm? So, and there are a million examples of that. That's just one tiny way that the words don't equal the message, and tone is what differentiates them.
Well, we're going to go to break so I can go get some pistachios. But you've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mara Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 1 p.m. Eastern on Fridays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies, from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and Intangify your business today.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Intangify. I'm your host, Matthew Asbell. My guest is Laurence Shanet, and Laurence is a creative director and writer and director. He actually differentiates creative director from director. That's something I'm just learning now. But we were talking about the message that you use to convey what you're interested in, what you want, and really to try to reach the audience, listening to what it is they're interested in and speaking to them based on their interests as opposed to what you find interesting. We were talking a bit before the break about tone, And Laurence, you had a comment right at the end, which I interrupted you. I don't know if you remember, but I interrupted you to go to the break. But let's sort of reiterate where we are on the idea of tone can completely change the meaning and how you choose tone and as part of the writing.
Absolutely. Whether it's a character in a script that is part of a commercial or part of a script you might have written yourself for a speech or something that's in a television show. In general, people don't always say what they mean. Sometimes they do. Some people are more direct. And I think that tone goes a long way to telling you about a person. Is that person snarky? Is that person jovial? And everyone communicates in different ways. There's no right way to do it. When I talk to people about communicating on behalf of their company, I often use the same kind of thought process. What is your company as a person? How would you embody your company if that person were someone you met at a party? Is it someone who's really smart and authoritative and talks about their work because they're a scientist? Is it someone who's always making jokes? And there isn't a right answer, but there are a lot of different answers. And I think companies can succeed or fail based on what that personality is, because ultimately a brand or a company or even just a person's own brand, to the extent that people use that kind of terminology now, is a reflection of what people want to interact with. Who do you want to hang out with at the party? And sometimes that's different. Some days I want to learn something new. Some days I want to hear a good joke. Some days I just want someone to listen to me. So thinking about that, I think, is very helpful for both people and companies in terms of determining their tone and then being pretty consistent. You don't want that company to seem like a psychopath because every day it has a different personality. You want to know whom you're talking to and rely on them and have some idea of how they're likely to respond.
You're so funny. Like you go right where my brain goes. So right before you said that, I was about to talk to you about consistency, and and it was because you mentioned that you could want to hang out with a different person in each different time when you're sort of talking about it in the personal context. And what I was thinking, in terms of that as it ties to a company branding or even personal branding is, well, do I have a consistent personal brand? I mean, I think how do you even select that and know that this is what we will be stood for and known and how people will recognize us? It seems, at least, and maybe it's the world of attorneys because we're boring, that I can't possibly imagine what would be my personal brand and my tone that I'd want to convey. But companies do this every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think companies, just as we have lots of aspects to our personalities, a company might also, but in the context of business, you want some consistency because in general, if you meet someone and they're always sort of a completely different human each time, that's very disturbing. It's kind of unnerving, but they might have not everyone's always in the same mood. There's a certain amount of latitude. And as long as it's consistent with the general personality and values of that person, as far as you know them, it won't conflict with the image you have. And that's when I think people get very unnerved, is of someone that you always thought of as calm and solid, whatever. If that person is suddenly manic, something's wrong. And it's kind of upsetting and disturbing. And in many ways with brands, it's about trust. And you'll trust a brand less if it's constantly changing its tone or its message. And some of how you make the decision is based on what people would want from that. If you are selling juice, the stakes are much lower than if you're selling life insurance, let's say, which is one reason that for many years, a lot of brands in the insurance category were really boring. And then they discovered that more important than that is differentiation. Insurance is basically the same at other than your specific limits and coverages. The process is kind of the same. And that's when companies like Geico and Progressive discovered, oh, we want to create a personality for ourselves. We want to be more fun than them because then we'll communicate that we get you as a customer. You know, we know who you are. We're not this robotic thing. And so they realized that there was more value in that, because the biggest task was differentiating themselves from all the other insurance companies. People believed that we'll cover you. If we're big enough to have an ad on TV, people know that you're you know, a legit entity, and that wasn't the problem. They were solving for the wrong problem as that industry matured. So I think understanding what people need and want from you and maintaining that trust has a lot to do with it, but so does connecting with them. And so in some cases, humor is helpful. In other cases, humor might be sort of disarming in a bad way. If you didn't want that, you know, you don't want your doctor cracking a joke when he or she is explaining what's wrong with X organ in your body. So I think that context is important.
Yeah, as you were talking about sort of the trust element, the word that was coming to my mind that the person communicating with the brand wants is reliability. They want to be able to rely on what they know it is like when they go to you, right? So what that experience is. So it's a reliance on that, and that you know, again, has a parallel in my world, which is the world of trademarks, where the name and the logo are meant to be a sign of the quality of the product, so that you rely on that name as a shorthand way to know that that's the quality I'm going to get when I go and buy that product. So it's very much that reliance. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think that's the reason I'm assuming that brands were created in the first place. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to brand anything. It's like, oh, that's a tomato. Great, I like tomatoes. But one brand might be reliably better tasting than another. And same goes for dishwashers and any other item. You know, the bigger the purchase, the higher the stakes, I guess. But if you're buying a car, aside from the other things that it can communicate about you, like status and whatever else, the reliability is something that you want to know is there, because every time you get in it, it could kill you. So you want it to work. And so reliability is very important, knowing that this brand will likely respond in this way. But the stakes are higher in some than others. When it's like a purple cheese snack, it doesn't matter as much. What matters is it going to be fun to eat it? Is it going to be interesting? Is it going to be good tasting? Because those stakes are lower.
But it's sort of interesting, the more modern era of, particularly of e-commerce, there, like, I think what you've stated is sort of the traditional view of brands and the traditional view of trademarks. But there are, I mean, and on Amazon, I have been a consumer of products that I did not understand or recognize the name they use. In fact, the name they used was gobbledygook as far as I was concerned, and still made that purchase, you know, sometimes repeatedly. You know, so like there's a change there. I think that the traditional view is that, and then there are some who are just like, and maybe it's like you said, it's about what the product is. But I mean, I don't know. I bought some things that were, you know, not $1 items, you know, and I think people are increasingly do that. There's sort of a new strategy that some use, which says, you know, the name doesn't matter. It's I've got to be the cheapest, or I've got to have the coolest video, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think if you're buying something, I mean, I know for me, if I'm buying something that doesn't cost much, then, or if there's a chance to spend very little on something that you were going to spend more for, and the stakes aren't that high, absolutely, I'll try the off-brand thing. You can tell which ones are. A lot of them make an effort to seem like a branded, legit thing, especially on Amazon. And they're mostly OEM items. I guess that's a little in the weeds. OEM, most people know these days, but the companies that make things often for the big brands are original equipment manufacturers. They're people who produce items and parts on behalf of other brands, and then they white label them. So a lot of those companies are now selling directly to people on Amazon, and sometimes you can get a great deal. And to go back to the thing I said earlier about, say, a plastic step stool, you want a folding step stool in your kitchen, and a normal one if you went to Bed Bath and Beyond, which I used to jokingly call Bloodbath and Beyond, and I guess I cursed it because now they're seemingly going under. But if you go to that store, the thing will cost $40 or $50, but you can get it for $9 on Amazon, and there's a good chance it's not that different. And that's really the difference between a branded product and not. But that $9 one, if it's the same and maybe even made by the same company, why not take a chance on it? Sure, there's a chance that it could collapse and you'll hurt yourself because it's a step stool, but chances are it's probably going to be fine. And if it's not, you're out $9, and you can probably get the one that was 40 or 50 for 30 the next time, and it'll be a wash, but you have the chance of saving a bunch of money or discovering something really cool. So I think that calculation when you go on to Amazon is very big. And that's something people should probably take into account when they are marketing a product, is thinking about how important it is for the consumer. Does trust matter? If not, then personality starts to matter more. Are you someone at the party who consumers would want to hang out with and identify with, to the point where buying that brand is worth more to them?
Yeah. So I did just buy several step stools on Amazon from a no-name brand. So thank you for that. Hopefully they're safe.
Too, actually, that's why I brought that up. Wow, I didn't know the step stool market was so huge. We're both step stool consumers.
We might have bought from the same unknown brand.
Very possible.
But actually, I mean, I'm reminded, and we're going to go to break in a second. I'm reminded of I think one of my first of those type of Amazon purchases, which was maybe almost 20 years ago. And I was going to Australia, and I wanted to get a travel guitar, and I paid $5 for a travel guitar.
$5? You can get an adult guitar.
Yeah, no body, like a travel one, so you could carry it with you in a backpack, right? You may have heard like the Martin backpacker, like that's like the model one that you would use, right? And I think at the time that was like a $200 thing, right? So I bought this. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I got this one, this cheap one. Maybe it was eBay. I don't remember where I got it, but I tuned it. I got it home. I tuned it up. I played it that day. I played it the next day. 3 days later, the head broke like that. It just came unglued. It was the end. I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm never doing that again.
It's a little bit sad as a guitar player. It's okay if that happens, but it should happen while you're destroying a hotel room with it, because that's there is a time for a guitar to break, but usually it's a better story.
Yeah, they knew that they thought that's why I bought it. It was an acoustic guitar, not an electric, but you get the idea. Anyway, we're going to go to a break. You've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies, from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc, Fridays at noon Eastern, and Intangify your business today.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the Nonprofit Sector Connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC, at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Intangify. I'm your host, Matthew Aspel. Our guest is Laurence Shanet, creative director, and writer. We've been talking about creativity and messaging. And messaging, we covered in the first part of the program, really the content of the message, the tone of the message. We veered off into a little bit about branding, but we're going to come back to the message again. And Laurence, I wanted to see if you could address, the different media. You produce film and television. You do commercials. You write technical articles. How does the medium matter to you as the presenter, or the brand, and to the purchaser?
Some of it's about how that medium can carry your message, what capability it has. TV, obviously, sight, sound, motion, you have a lot more tools. Print, you have fewer tools. And also how people consume them are different. People, when they sit down to read, say, a book, are going to have very focused, active attention paid to that. If you're communicating on television, you may or may not get that, because someone may, especially if it's a commercial, someone may be off getting a drink because the commercial is a chance to take a break. If you're making the show itself, they're more likely to be captive and pay attention. So I think it's a combination of those things. How active or passive is the audience in terms of consuming it? And then what capabilities does it have to transmit your message? Is it a still thing that is just a static image or words? Is it something that they have to actively want to take in or not? All those things are part of it. And then there's also the amount of immersiveness. So a page, writing on a page is as immersive as the reader decides to make it. Television or anything with film can be a lot more immersive. Something like VR is even more immersive. You're really there in that world and it's magical, but the effort that you have to take, the hurdle you have to get over to get someone to do it is much greater, because they have to get a headset and go in and put that on, and not all people like to. And so sometimes there's a relationship between how immersive something is and what barrier you have to overcome to get a person to immerse themselves.
So this is sort of a two-part question related to that. I mean, on one hand, I wonder if when someone comes to you, they come to you with the medium already in mind, if that's what happens most of the time, or if they come to you and say, this is what I want to accomplish, and you help them select the medium. But hold the thought a second, because I want to get the second part of the question out. In today's world, where everybody is a content producer, and we have these social media platforms that allow us to select our medium, how do we select our medium on our own? I post to LinkedIn. I'm like, oh, should I make this a video? Should it be a still photo? Do I just write the texts? Why am I like I have to make those decisions, and we all have to make those decisions multiple times a day now. So where do you come in the decision-making process? And what do you tell people who have to make that decision for their content on social media?
I think that when people involve me, is sometimes not up to me. If it's someone that I have an ongoing relationship with, whether it's writing speeches or technical work for them, or whether it's a company that I make commercials for, or a TV network that I direct for, they may come to me earlier in the process and ask me that, and I'll make a recommendation based on what the message is and how easy or hard it is to communicate, what the best way is to do it. Other times I'll get approached and it's already been decided. If someone's giving a keynote speech, the medium is the medium. I might be able to tell them, sure, have a slideshow with it. and we'll design some stuff. But just as often, it's already been decided. I'm speaking at a conference and I will have these tools available and so on. If it's a company, there's often a larger plan so that you can do all those things. Often you'll have a TV campaign and internet banner ads, and you want to tie all those things together. And that's where medium and message converge, because you're creating messages for specific media. And if you're lucky, having them work synergistically with each other. So you might have little banner ads that help the big TV spot, or many companies do this. They'll bring out a new idea at the Super Bowl, and then afterward, the rest of the year, they'll have other ads that are maybe shorter and reinforce the bigger message that they established at the Super Bowl.
And the second part of the question, when people are posting on social media, you have any guidance for them?
Yeah, sorry, you did a very good job of saying there are two parts of this question, then I completely ignored one of them.
But that's what always happens to me. I can never keep all those questions in mind.
They say that goldfish have really short memories, and I think I'm shorter. That's one of those weird things. It actually turns out that goldfish don't. They actually have really decent memories, and it's just something that we decided is a trope. But so on a place like LinkedIn, that's a good place to go back to what we were talking about earlier, where you have to think about how much that person cares about what you're communicating, as opposed to how much you care about it. And that'll determine whether they're likely to pay attention in one form versus another. So as you said, even on LinkedIn, there are a bunch of different ways you could do it. You could have a written post, you could have a video, and you have to think about what the barrier is to get them to start listening. And then you have to think about during it, are you being interesting enough that they're going to keep listening? And so putting a video is interesting because it communicates more about you. They can get a sense of what you're like as a person. That can be very useful. In other cases, that might not be as important, but getting a headline across so that they know that the topic is really useful to them. So that first headline and being above the fold is a big thing on LinkedIn. You might have a long headline or a long message, but if they only see half of it, they may never click the read more and find out what that is. So it's really that barrier to getting someone interested, and will they continue? Because it doesn't matter what the second half is if they're not interested in the first half.
I think that was a great answer.
Well, I'm glad I listened to the second part then.
So let's go back to the beginning of our program, where I purposely put on a red shirt because of that whole red shirt thing, and because I know you were changing your outfit. But I want to ask you, there was something you had told me about the voice of the message, and you called it a red suit syndrome. And I wanted to see if you could explain that to folks.
Yeah, I came up with that a few years ago, and I gave a talk about it as well with the same title. It came from the idea, a lot of my friends also in creative professions and I noticed that clients were coming to us and they would say, here's my favorite ad on TV. It's really funny. What can you give me that's like that? Or Nike did something that's really cool and I want the equivalent. And the reality of that is some of them are ready to do that. Some think they are, but then they become uncomfortable when you give them something that's as groundbreaking, because Nike takes a certain number of chances every time they do something. Geico takes a certain number of chances. All these major advertisers in their own ways are being very bold. So what it reminded me of was that if someone walks into a store and they're looking at a bunch of things, whether it's neckties or suits or something like that, the thing that they notice, the thing they really like, is often the brightest, poppiest thing. And so if you walk into a store and there's a bright red suit and someone wears that and they have a lot of style, they look amazing in it and you're very impressed. Like someone who can pull off a bright red suit, that person has confidence and swagger, riz, as they say now in some circles. So it looks really amazing. And you come in and you say, oh, I want my red suit. And then you go and you put it on and you look in the mirror and you don't really feel comfortable walking out the door of that store in a bright red suit. And that's not because the suit's not cool, it's because you're not that comfortable in it. So clients do that a lot. They'll say, I'd like the equivalent of this very funny ad that I've seen on TV. And you write them the equivalent of that, and they say, oh, well, that's a little wild and crazy for me. I don't feel that comfortable in it, because they wouldn't wear that red suit. And when they see their version of it for their company, taking the chances with their brand, they may not have that risk tolerance. So often you have to give them something that's quite different than what they thought they wanted for them to be comfortable. Or in certain situations, you'll want to push them to take that chance, because the actual risk to the brand is really being too conservative, being too boring, and getting them out of their comfort zone is important, and they'll do a better job. And you really have to weigh which thing it is. Is it that they're being too nervous and aren't taking enough good creative chances, or is that not really appropriate for them and they shouldn't be wearing a red suit?
It relates very well as a sort of a corollary back to what we were talking about before with consistency, trust, and reliability. And part it was about like if you keep changing who you are, if you keep changing the way you present yourself, if you're not known for that, then you're going to be like the guy in the red suit. You're going to be uncomfortable, and it's not going to be you. And so you kind of have to be you and be true, but you have to push the boundaries a little bit and stay within, at least what people expect, or at least are willing to accept about what they know about you or your brand.
Yeah, I think also, well, imagine that you go to your family reunion or Thanksgiving and your mom suddenly shows up in a red suit. That'd be very disconcerting. But if you have a friend who's a stand-up comic and they showed up in a red suit, you laugh and it's great and it's perfect for them. So it really is about expectations for that person. I had a funny instance of that, because I've told the red suit analogy a bunch of times, and a client of mine had heard me giving that talk, and then we did a commercial for them, and it turned out that it was a brand where the stakes were fairly low, and it was probably a good idea for them to take some chances for memorability. It was a company that sells sandwiches. It was basically the Canadian equivalent of Subway. It was a sub sandwich chain called Mr. Sub. And so I'd just given that, and I was skeptical because they said they really wanted to take some chances, and I was encouraging that low risk thing, buying a sub once. And so I proposed in a script that we actually have their announcer, because they wanted someone who was Mr. Sub, to wear a red suit. And I tested them, and they went for it. And so there's actually a guy in a red suit, because I had that red suit conversation with a client. There's a commercial that has a guy in a red suit, and it did really well when it aired. It had a huge stickiness, and we did a bunch of executions in the campaign, and it was very popular for a while on Canadian TV. So there is a red suit out there, a literal one.
I'm going to get one. We're about to go to break. Just before we do, I guess just to tie into that, I want to tell you that I go to this conference every year, and I have a friend who I usually see at those conferences, and he every year he wears a Hawaiian shirt with a tie. This is a conference where usually everyone's wearing suits. It stopped being suits after COVID, but it's a conference where everyone would be dressed up. But this guy would always be a Hawaiian shirt and tie. And I just came back from this conference a couple of weeks ago, and I saw him, and he wasn't wearing the Hawaiian shirt, and it really bothered me.
No. Well, that was his brand, right?
Yeah, it really concerned me. He was like way more conservative than he used to be. I was very concerned by that.
Might have been a death in the family if you're losing the Hawaiian shirt. That's not good.
No, I talked to him. He's like, oh, I'm more corporate now. I don't know what he was thinking. But anyway, we've got to go to break. You've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will be frank about health to advocate for all of us.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Intangify. I'm your host, Matthew Asbell. My guest is Laurence Shanet, creative director, and author, and writer. And we are discussing messaging and creativity. And I want to shift gears now, Laurence, to talk a little bit more about creativity and sort of how you find inspiration, or how people can find inspiration. You shared some tricks of the trade with me maybe a little earlier, I think involving sort of imposing restrictions on people. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. How do we get more creative, particularly in our messaging?
Yeah, people often, when they're in creative professions very early in their careers, they get very upset when restrictions are put on what they can do or say in the ad. And most of the more senior creatives that I know who have been doing it for a while, they almost embrace some of those because it helps focus you. So if you have a blue sky thing, imagine sitting down and someone tells you, you can write an essay or a novel about anything. It would probably take you days just to figure out what you're going to write about. You wouldn't be sure that it was the right thing. And that often isn't really what matters. You can almost pick anything and do something interesting about it, but you have this sort of writer's block / analysis paralysis that's the beginning of the creative process in many cases. So sometimes having that restriction, that focus, can actually make you more creative and get you over that hump to where you're actually doing something and the problem solving is interesting versus just trying to figure out what to do. And I think that comedians often have that same kind of a situation when they learn to do improv. One of the things is giving you exercises that have very specific restrictions, and doing those exercises can often unleash that creative thing. Maybe they'll tell you that no matter what you're saying, it has to be these same 5 words, but you might say that phrase differently, and you can see if you can communicate a whole idea but using the same words over and over again. And it's surprising how well you can do that. It kind of goes a little bit to what we were talking about earlier when you say the same sentence sarcastically versus not. So restrictions like that can sometimes, if you learn to use those tools, can stoke your creativity instead of squashing it.
I've had another guest on this program before who really specializes in sort of creative problem solving. And what she had talked about was kind of interesting. It was a corollary to this in the sense that she advocated towards rule breaking, or assumption breaking of rules of assumptions. And if I put those two together, which is the inspiration I'm getting from this conversation, having spoken to her in the past, there's the idea of you need to know the rules because that gives you focus, but then you can elect to break the rules And that can put you down a totally different path in terms of something creative because it's unusual.
In any creative discipline, I think there is that idea of the rules are there and they're important. And often when people first start out in any creative endeavor, their first instinct is, I want to break all the rules. I want to make my thing different and special. And different and special is really great. But often the rules are there for a reason. So if you're cooking and you want to make a really amazing dish, sure, you want it to be innovative, but if you haven't learned the basic techniques and you just throw a bunch of stuff in a very hot pan, it's going to be a disaster. So learning those same tools as a writer, as a singer, whatever it is, it's often very helpful. And if you always ruthlessly adhere to those rules, you'll make a thing that's just like everyone else's thing. You'll make a boring song that sounds like a bunch of songs that came before. You'll make a boring film that is like a bunch of other stuff. But breaking too many rules just feels like chaos. So it's that do the thing and then change one thing about it that often works really well. And that's how, in many cases, jokes work, is that you set up an expectation and then you subvert it. And that's what the punchline is you think you know what you're hearing, and then you get this other thing, and that's very funny because you expected X and you got Y. So that really is a very smart structure. I don't know who your guest was, but clearly that person and I have similar thought processes. I think that idea of expectation and then being different from expectation is a really useful structure. And in order to do that, you have to first have the expected thing. If you're just all over the place, then there are no rules. And in a way, people run into this every day, because if you're watching, say, a TV show, and it's about outer space 500 years from now, the rules are very different because technology can enable all these things versus a realistic thing that's happening in the present day. If you suddenly have someone come down from Mars, that's a very different movie because what we're capable of is different. So having a world and a world that has rules is a starting place, and then there'll be expectations because of that. And then a smart subversion of those can work really well. Whereas complete subversion just seems like chaos and nothing has meaning anymore.
I mean, I think historically there have been the accidental breaking of a particular rule that have led to something amazing. And then there are the sort of those of us who are struggling to be creative and intentionally must break the rule. And so there can be, I think there can be both. But so usually it's the accidental ones that are the ones that end up being even better. Which takes me to my last topic in the last few minutes that we have, which is, you had talked to me a little bit about the state of creativity in 2023 and the whole, AI trend and how things are and how everybody's relying on AI or purposely putting out there that they're not relying on AI. So share with us your thoughts on AI and how that ties into the world of creativity.
That's become a big thing now. As you and I were talking briefly about, I see more and more profiles on LinkedIn saying not created by AI. People are asserting that just so everyone knows. And there's this sense that using AI is cheating in some way. And sometimes it is. But more often, just as finger wagging parents would have said to kids, if you cheat, you're only cheating yourself. And it does sort of limit you to the limits of AI, which often AI isn't trying to do what you think it's trying to do. So the product doesn't necessarily serve you well. So I talk to clients a lot. First of all, people who are comfortable as creative people, who are good creators, aren't that worried about AI coming and taking their jobs, because at least as of now, and this will probably change and we should be terrified, but as of now, it's not very good at being creative. It's not very good at subbing for you. It is very good at certain other things. So for someone who's confident in their creativity, I think AI isn't really this looming terrible thing. It's a tool that you can use, and you want to teach people who maybe aren't experts at being creative or creating things, how to use that tool, and more importantly, how not to use it, because a lot of them tend to use it out of fear. I'm a bad writer, so I'll have ChatGPT write it for me. because they're not necessarily a good writer, they don't realize how bad the thing is that ChatGPT wrote, because it seems coherent. It seems like it's smart. And I'm going to want to come up with the name for an effect that I've noticed, which is that very often ChatGPT, when it's writing about a subject and the reader is not expert in that, ChatGPT seems expert. And the more you know about a subject, the dumber ChatGPT seems. So someone who's really expert at something thinks that ChatGPT is terrible at it, but someone who knows a little bit is probably more impressed. I'm sure if ChatGPT wrote something about intellectual property, I might be fooled by it. You definitely wouldn't be.
I hope so.
Maybe.
Yes.
If you are, then the robot overlords are about to take our jobs, and it is true. But I have a hunch it wouldn't be. ChatGPT, because it's sort of averaging things out and guessing, can make mistakes on a huge level, and people think of them as, oh my God, it made up a lie. But that's not how ChatGPT works. It's not thinking about its sentences. It doesn't understand anything it says. It's just averaging out what is the most likely next word to come based on millions and millions of examples in the real world. But it doesn't understand all of those words as a thought. So it's not lying. It's just putting a bunch of things together. Imagine these toy blocks, but it doesn't know what those things are. So it doesn't know when it's lying. It's just taking these tools that humans use called words and jumbling them together in what it sees as the most likely order. It's not making a statement of veracity or not.
Well, Laurence, I really appreciate your being here, and all of your comments, which were definitely not average. So I'm going to go and eat some pistachios in my red suit, and and I will look forward to chatting with you again on the other end. But thank you so much for being here. You've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc. Tune in next week. My guest will be Maurice Bretzfield, who is a digital marketing strategist. Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks. Bye.